When it comes to getting crisp, high-def video out of the GameCube, we have quite a few options now. I've covered several on the channel, like the Carby, a fantastic plug-and-play solution that delivers excellent results. Then there's the Pluto mod, which works similarly to the Carby, but is internal to the console for a more factory-looking result. And the list goes on. But today, we got a brand new option, one that I'm really excited about. The team at PixelFX is putting a fresh spin on what an HDMI mod for the GameCube can be with their newest RetroGEM offering. So let's dive in and check it out. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today, I'm really excited to share with you and give you a first look at the latest HDMI kit from the folks over at PixelFX. This time around, they're bringing their RetroGEM HDMI mod to the Nintendo GameCube. As you may know, the team of engineers at PixelFX have already brought their crisp HD video output to the Sega Dreamcast, PS1, PS2, and the Nintendo 64 using their universal RetroGEM board, and now it's the GameCube's time to get the HDMI treatment. Now I know a lot of you may be saying, hey Tito, we got plenty of HDMI options for the GameCube, why do we need another? And to that I'd say you're mostly right, but if you're familiar with the PixelFX kits, then you know it's more than just a simple way of plugging your GameCube to a TV using an HDMI cable. The RetroGEM provides not only the simplicity of being able to connect the GameCube to any modern television over HDMI, but it's also a fantastic scaler that allows you to output up to a 1440p video signal, as well as add things like scan lines, provide motion adaptive deinterlacing, and so much more. It's basically the Pluto HDMI mod on steroids, but we'll be getting into all the nitty-gritty details a bit later. So in this video, I'll be showing you what's included in the RetroGEM HDMI kit. I'll walk you through the installation process, go over the major features the RetroGEM is capable of, review the pros and cons, and of course provide you with my overall thoughts. So at the heart of this kit is of course the RetroGEM board, designed to work universally across all supported consoles. Those familiar with the PixelFX mods should be well acquainted with this board by now. And unique to the GameCube is this custom flex ribbon cable, which will interface with all the necessary points on the GameCube's motherboard to pull the pure digital video signal and pipe it directly to the RetroGEM board. Also included is a baggie containing a few items to help with the installation, as well as a Wi-Fi antenna since the RetroGEM can be updated over the air via Wi-Fi, as well as another ribbon cable to connect the RetroGEM board to the included full-size HDMI port. Okay, so that's everything that comes with the RetroGEM HDMI kit. Now before we jump into the installation tutorial, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video, PCBWay. If you have an idea for a new mod or want to assemble an open source project, PCBWay provides you with the tools to make them a reality. From 3D printing services in an array of materials, all the way to other services like CNC machining, injection molding, and of course PCB and flex ribbon fabrication. So when it comes to taking your retro mods to the next level, PCBWay is the place to make that happen. Check out the link in the description for PCBWay to get $5 off your first order, and again a huge thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. Alright, let's go ahead and install this HDMI kit into the Nintendo GameCube. Alright, to get started we of course need to tear down the console to get to the motherboard. The GameCube is pretty straightforward to disassemble. It does have quite a few screws, and I've actually already removed them all, making the process even quicker to showcase it for you. Once we take out the motherboard, we need to flip it over and decide which port we want to remove. You can actually remove either one, but I opted to get rid of the digital port since the HDMI port will essentially be replacing that. Now I wanted to try my luck at using some chip quick low melt solder to remove the port, and I really think it should have worked. However, I did struggle quite a bit, and in retrospect, I think it mostly had to do with the two large anchor pins on either side of the port that did keep it clipped in place. Regardless, since I couldn't get it to work, I decided to remove all of the low melt solder from the pins and try a different method. This time, I actually trimmed those pins on the side to see if it would help at removing the port. So I actually decided to use some hot air, so I masked off the surrounding area and got to blasting the digital port with some heat. And thankfully, it worked out and I was able to remove the port. And with a little isopropyl alcohol and a Q-tip, I was easily able to remove all of the residual chip quick and clean the area. Now comes the fun part, soldering in the flex ribbon cable. We first need to locate the video encoder chip, which is right here behind the digital port. Before we solder in the ribbon, however, we need to remove the 2 tiny capacitors near the chip, which will help us lay the ribbon cable flat. Now we can position and align the ribbon cable onto the pins on the video encoder chip and tack it in place. Once in position, we can fully solder it onto the pins. Just take your time, use the smallest amount of solder, apply generous amounts of flux, which will help ensure that you don't bridge any of the pins. Now over here, sort of below the ribbon, I should have removed a little bit of the solder mask to expose the ground plane below. Because the ribbon is actually designed to be anchored to it, I was able to remove some of the solder mask off camera and anchor the ribbon cable to it. This isn't an absolutely necessary step, but be advised to do this before you solder in the ribbon cable onto the encoder chip. It'll make it a whole lot easier. Anyway, now we need to locate a few vias to solder to. The first of which is here near the C222 silk screening. I recommend scraping away some of the solder mask near it so that tinning the via can be done more easily. And do the same to this via here. Then apply some flux and tin them both with a bit of solder. Now we can go ahead and solder the flex ribbon to these points as shown. Next, we need to locate 2 more vias. One here near the C55 silk screening, and the other one right here. Then bend over the ribbon as shown, and I recommend first soldering to this via here, followed by the one over here. And go ahead and clean things up as needed. Great, back over to this part of the ribbon, we're going to go ahead and anchor it to this large pad for the digital port we just removed. Then solder this part of the ribbon to this pin on the AV port. Great, our flex ribbon is fully installed. Now we can go ahead and install the RetroGEM mount, which goes right here. The mount is secured by soldering to these 4 points. Next, we need to solder these threaded mounts in place. I do wish these came pre-soldered onto the bracket, as it would have made the process just a little bit easier. Next, we need to configure the RetroGEM for the GameCube by soldering a few jumpers. For these up here, we need to jump points C, D, and E. And for the ones here, just H and J. And this is what the gem should look like when it's done and fully configured. Now we can go ahead and connect our flex ribbon cable and antenna to the RetroGEM board, and then mount it with the 2 included screws. Then place the included thermal pad right below the GEM's FPGA chip, which is around here. This will help dissipate some of the heat coming off the FPGA to the lower RF shield of the GameCube. Next, we need to grab the other ribbon cable and connect it to the RetroGEM adapter, and then plug it into the RetroGEM board. Then on the other side of the ribbon, we'll attach our full-size HDMI port. Here you can see that I'm marking the lower RF shield with a Sharpie because we will need to trim this area to allow the HDMI ribbon cable as well as the Wi-Fi antenna to pass through. I used a combination of a hacksaw and some pliers to do the job, but in retrospect, using some heavy-duty tin snips may have made the job a little bit easier. Once done, I did add some Kapton tape to the rough edge of the trim to help protect the ribbon and antenna when passing through. And when putting the console back together and securing the lower RF shield, only use this single screw here. You don't want to put the other screw over here because that's going to get in the way of the thermal pad that we placed on the RetroGEM board. Anyway, now we can go ahead and start to reassemble the GameCube. I went ahead and slipped the Wi-Fi antenna into this cavity here, which seemed like the perfect spot for it. And there you have it, folks, the PixelFX RetroGEM fully installed. So I have to say, the results are obviously fantastic, and don't get me wrong, but this may be one of the easier RetroGEM kits to install in comparison to the other supported consoles. The video encoder only requires soldering on one side of the chip, and the legs have a pretty sizable pitch when compared to some of the other consoles out there. But it is still a challenging mod nonetheless, unless you're an experienced modder. Now, a couple days after installing the RetroGEM, Dan of PixelFX actually also sent over the Hardware 2 revision of the GC Loader, which is an optical drive emulator, so I went ahead and installed that too. I covered this in another video, and it's a fantastic ODE. Of course, there are other options out there like the fantastic Flippy Drive, all of which are compatible with the RetroGEM, and offer a great way to load games right off of an SD card, making this a pretty stunning combination. But there's another reason that I installed an ODE, like the GC Loader, and that's Game ID, but we'll be touching on that in just a moment. So with that, let's take a look at the incredible features the RetroGEM has to offer. Okay, so to see the actual features, we need to pull up the on-screen display, or OSD. This is done by pressing the R and L triggers, right on the D-pad, and X all at the same time. And here's the familiar RetroGEM menu that I'm sure many of you are well acquainted with at this point, and as you can see here, this is the GameCube variant marked by that little GC in the menu banner. Now, since I covered quite a few RetroGEM kits on the channel, I won't be going over every single feature, otherwise this would be a pretty long video. I'm just really going to focus on the ones that I use most often. So one of the first things I always do after installing one of these kits is to make sure it's working properly. To do this, I head to the Debug Self-Test option under the System Settings, and as you can see, everything is working as it should. Heart icons across the board mean that all the points that we soldered to on the motherboard are solid and making a good connection. If we saw an X anywhere on screen, that would mean we would need to recheck our work and ensure everything is soldered properly. This option can be a real time saver when troubleshooting any issues you may be experiencing. Anyway, back to the main menu, the option that I think most people will be interested in is video. Here you'll basically find all the settings to adjust and process the picture. Now remember that this is the Shiny Edition, so we'll see a few extra features here that are not available on the Basic Edition of RetroGEM, so I'll be going over those first. Here, under Output Resolution, you can output a video signal all the way up to 1440p. The basic version, on the other hand, only goes up to 720p, which means you get an additional 4 resolution options with the Shiny Edition. Going back under deinterlacing, you'll see you'll get a few extra upgrades. You get blend, weave, and motion adaptive deinterlacing modes. These are a great option to have for games that cannot be put into progressive mode, especially if you're not using an ODE like the GC Loader that can actually force boot some games into progressive. Another added capability are more advanced scanline settings, such as custom slot mask designs. Here you can find quite a few of these pre-configured filters under the preset menu. So those are some of the major added capabilities that the Shiny has over the basic version, which may have you wondering if it even makes sense to get the basic version in the first place. Well, the basic version of the Gem is $70 cheaper than the Shiny, and if you have an advanced scaler like the RetroTink 4K, then that can handle all the additional output resolutions, filters, and so much more than if you had a Shiny version of the Gem. The Shiny version really only shines, no pun intended, if you want to use the console alone without a scaler. Now, another great scaler option, especially if you plan to use it with RetroGEM modded consoles, is the Morph, which also comes from the folks over at PixelFX. The engineers over at PixelFX actually added a few very cool features that integrate with the RetroGEM modded console that could make it an ideal scaler for those specific systems. For example, when I plug a RetroGEM modded console like my GameCube here into the Morph, a new option appears in the menu, which is Morph Control. Because the RetroGEM can talk to the Morph, I'm able to control the settings of the Morph right from my controller, which is pretty cool. And as you can see, the Morph knows that it's connected to my GameCube RetroGEM as indicated here. Another cool feature is Game ID. Since the Morph is able to talk to the RetroGEM, it is also able to use Game ID and allows for you to save settings on a per game basis, which can be very useful. You can see here that it recognizes the game I'm playing by displaying part of the title here on the bottom. Now, of course, you don't need the Morph, as other extremely capable scalers like the RetroTink 4K can pretty much do the same things. But the Morph differentiates itself with its integrated features, such as the ability to be controlled directly by a RetroGEM modded console, as well as per game settings thanks to Game ID. Also, the price of the Morph is pretty attractive, since if you get 4 consoles modded with basic RetroGEM kits, the savings of not buying shiny versions for each console will essentially pay for the Morph and would give you more capability like 4K scaling. Anyway, this video isn't about the Morph, so let's get back to our modded GameCube. So here back on the main menu, we have presets, which have a bunch of pre-made scanline and slot mask effects, which is great if you're into emulating a CRT, but for me, I'm not really into all these effects, so I typically leave them turned off. And again, under the video settings, we covered a couple of the options like output resolution and deinterlacing, but another really interesting feature is direct mode, which has several options that basically sends a lagless, pure digital signal to an external scaler, allowing you to do all the video processing outside of the console. So if you plan to primarily utilize this feature, I definitely recommend buying the basic version of the kit, since your scaler can do everything the shiny can, and you'll save a few bucks. And lastly, under the systems menu, you can set things up like Wi-Fi, which enables you to update the gem over the air, and enable features like Game ID that allows you to save settings on a per game basis, which again is pretty incredible. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the features of RetroGEM, so I definitely recommend checking out my PS2 RetroGEM video, which goes a bit more in depth on some of the other features available. Overall, it's an incredible kit to have on the GameCube, but now let's go over the pros and cons. Okay, so when it comes to the pros, I think first and foremost, this is by far and away the most capable standalone HDMI kit out there for the GameCube, and the video output looks amazing as one would expect. Now, of course, there are other options like the Carby that when paired with a scaler can offer similar results, but like I said, as a standalone unit, no other HDMI kit comes close in terms of features. All the features integrated into the RetroGEM put it in a league of its own when compared to other external kits like the Carby and the Eon GCHD, and even the internal GC Dual and Pluto mods, but of course the price reflects that, but we'll get into that in a moment. Also, another pro is that this makes DOL 101 GameCube consoles, which don't have a digital port, the perfect candidate for this kit, since they're unable to utilize any plug-and-play solutions. My original plan actually for this video was to modify one of those 101 revision GameCubes, but the one that I had sitting on the shelf was unfortunately broken and I couldn't use it. So in short, the DOL 101 may be the ideal console to mod with the RetroGEM kit. And lastly, while I know there are a lot of folks out there that don't want to mod their consoles and want to stick to an external solution like the Carby, I think there are some people who will appreciate having a sleek, low-profile HDMI solution instead of a huge adapter sticking out of the back. Anyway, those are the pros. But now, let's get into the cons. Obviously, the biggest con is the installation itself. While I found it to be one of the easier RetroGEM installs to do, it does require soldering proficiency. My advice is that if you're new to modding, is to get one of the recommended modders to install the kit for you. There's a whole bunch listed on the PixelFX documentation page, so that'd be the first place I'd look. Also, while technically a reversible mod if you keep your removed digital output, it does still require minimal trimming to the lower RF shield, which some folks may not be comfortable with. And the last con is of course the price. Let's say you don't have an external scaler. In that case, I'd recommend getting the Shiny Edition, which will set you back $190, which certainly isn't cheap. And that doesn't include the cost of installation if you need that to be done for you as well. However, if you do have an advanced scaler like the Morph or RetroTink 4K, then you could opt for the cheaper basic version, which is $120, nearly $70 cheaper. At the end of the day, it really just depends on what you're looking for. Some folks are more than happy with their external HDMI adapters, while I do think others will find the advanced features that the RetroGEM brings to the table to be quite valuable. Well folks, there you have it. PixelFX's latest HDMI mod for the Nintendo GameCube. What do you all think? Is it worth the price over one of those external HDMI adapters? I'd love to hear your thoughts, so definitely drop them down below in the comments. Now if you enjoyed this video, I really think you'll like this one here, so check it out. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and I'll catch you again next time.